reference to your search efforts, what, if anything, of evidentiary value did you and your team locate?
I found multiple pieces of red and clear taillight.
And where were they in relation to sort of the grid or the area that you had set up?
They were on the street in between the flagpole and the fire hydrant. We found a sneaker. The sneaker was flush up against the curb and it was upside down.
Jurors heard new details about key evidence in the murder trial against Massachusetts woman Karen Reed. As the Commonwealth seeks to prove Reed backed her SUV into her boyfriend and Boston police officer John O'Keefe, her defense argues the evidence was manipulated to frame Reed.
Were you aware that no one from law enforcement was controlling that crime scene?
I was not aware of that, no, sir.
Were you aware at that time that no one had been controlling it for about 6 or 7 hours before you were called?
I was not aware of that, sir.
Were you aware that the scene was left open to the public for hours before you were asked to search?
I was not aware of that.
Okay. Well, in addition to the sneaker and pieces of the taillight, a forensic scientist testified about additional evidence discovered on Karen Reed's SUV.
I observed an apparent hair on the rear quarter panel about here, and I also noted some pieces of glass on the rear bumper.
Now, this evidence of glass and hair was discovered after Reed's vehicle was transported into police custody, and the defense called this into question on cross-examination.
The glass pieces that we're looking at on the back of this bumper would have traveled, let's call it for round figures, about 60 miles in a blizzard before you saw it.
I don't know when the glass pieces were ended up on the bumper, so I couldn't say.
And of course, you knew that on February 1st, you knew a few days earlier, on the 29th, there had been a pretty significant snowstorm here in Massachusetts, correct?
Yes, I did have that information.
That hair potentially would have had to make that same 60-mile round trip in the same blizzard.
At the time, I don't know when that hair was deposited on the vehicle.
Right.
If you remember, the defense suggested earlier on in the trial that Reed's vehicle could have been manipulated when it was at the Sallyport dock. Let's listen to that.
How many people had access to that truck, that SUV?
Probably 45.
45. And just about every one of those 45 people would have access to that Sallyport and that SUV had they wanted to.
Had they wanted to, yes.
Now, as part of forensic scientist Maureen Harnett's examination of Karen Reed's SUV, she also tested the underside of the vehicle for blood. Let's listen to what her findings were.
And what were the results of that testing that you performed there in the garage?
Those were negative.
Reed's defense has theorized that John O'Keefe was instead beaten up at the home of police officer Brian Albert following a night out with friends, and thus the fatal injury sustained would not have come from Reed's vehicle. Now, joining me to speak about this all is legal crime analyst Brian Buckmeyer from the Law&Crime Network and attorney and former prosecutor Mari Henderson. So, Brian, you're a defense guy. That's what you did. That's what you do. That's what's in your heart. Many people that I know, myself included, have been highly suspicious of this investigation and the manner in which it has not been investigated and a potential for a cover-up and maybe even the planting of evidence. And I am not a conspiracy guy, and me and you have been point-counterpoint many times, defense guy, prosecutor guy. I'm concerned about this case. What about you?
I mean, I'm a defense attorney. I'm not concerned because I'm looking at it from the perspective of, is there enough to raise reasonable doubt? And so I actually went to Massachusetts jury instructions, and I went to see how they describe reasonable doubt, how a judge is ultimately going to read the instruction to the jury. And the most relevant sentence, I think, is if you evaluate all the evidence and you still have a reasonable doubt remaining, the defendant is entitled to that benefit of that doubt and must be acquitted. Now, this is what I always tell people, and I love when people hit me up on social media and say, Brian, what about this? What about this? I have some questions about this. And I say, if you have questions, and those questions are reasonable, and they give you doubts about the case, you know what you should do? Acquit. That's it. The defense doesn't have to prove that that hair only could have gotten there because Karen Reed backed into her then boyfriend and it got stuck there. To me, I hear that vehicle had to transport for 60 miles in a blizzard and a hair was still stuck to it. There's no blood or human substance that would have helped it to stick to it. A hair stayed on an SUV for 60 miles in a blizzard? That seems unreasonable to me. It seems reasonable. It could have been planted. Now, is it true? Is it not? I don't know, but it's reasonable and it gives me doubt.
I don't know, Mar. Have you ever been driving down like the highway, going like 65 miles an hour, and you got that bug on your window or something, and you're like, yeah, eventually it's got to fly off, and it just sticks there. But no, Brian's bringing up a good point. It's the
guts, though. That's what's sticking to the car.
That's sticking for holding,
very honest with ourselves.
Holding on for its life. As opposed to a piece of hair. No, Brian's bringing up a great point. Listen, we both been prosecutors. We want our cases to go in clean. We obviously want to convict people who are guilty of the offenses. But there have been so many missteps in this case that I think as a prosecutor, I would have gone to my boss before I became the boss, and I would have said, when I was a line prosecutor, I am concerned about the manner in which this case was investigated. I'm not saying the person didn't do it, but should I be going forward, do I really believe I have enough proof beyond a reasonable doubt? So as a prosecutor here, look, we've all dealt with cases. They're not perfect. The people aren't perfect. The investigations aren't perfect, and we fight our way through them. But is this just a little too much of a problem for you to be able to take palatably as a former prosecutor?
Well, what's interesting is Alan Jackson, the defense attorney, is also a former prosecutor from my old office, the Los Angeles County District Attorney, and he is doing everything right because you don't have to prove, like Brian said, like you don't have to prove what happened. You just have to create reasonable doubt. And he is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. And so he is showing every misstep in the investigation and then going even farther than that. It's not just that the investigation was sloppy, it's that there could have been a cover-up, a conspiracy. So you could have some people on the jury who believe in the conspiracy. You could have some people in the jury who said, conspiracy is a little far-fetched for me, but I don't think this was investigated properly, so I don't think they can prove their case. And you could have some people on the jury who think, well, all they really have here is motive, and the motive's not enough. And so I think every theory he's throwing out, something's going to stick.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I'm concerned that, and maybe it's just me getting older in life, that we're getting to a point where we used to believe, I was trained, I was mentored, that you had to really be genuinely convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. And I've tried some really hard cases. But at a certain point in time, it seems to me that people are more concerned about, well, I'll try it, and if I lose it, I lose it. What's the big deal? As opposed to whether or not it's the right thing to do. What are your thoughts?
Well, I do think that they probably felt that this case had enough motive behind it, lovers and intrigue and, everything going on, that they felt they could prove it based on that alone. But I still don't see it. And so probably I would not have charged this one, given the very weak forensic evidence and the way that forensic evidence was collected.
Yep. Okay. All right, guys. Well, okay. We're going to continue to monitor the Commonwealth's case as they seek to prove Karen Reed did indeed kill John O'Keefe with her SUV on that fateful night in January 2020. So stick with us at the Law&Crime Network as we bring you all the latest gavel-to-gavel coverage as always. And on that note, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more on these amazing guests on the other end. Please stay with us.